Today I want to talk to you about the knowing-doing gap. Read about this several years ago, and I found it fascinating when it talks about the applications for leadership in any organization, whether it's the local church or business world, academia, wherever you might be. And Piper and Sutton did a research project in the year 2000. Here's what they found out. The research question was why does so much education and training, management consulting, and business research, so many books and articles, lead to so little change? I mean, think about it. There's conferences every week, books, blogs, so many things that are out there that are giving information. And yet they found out that many times it doesn't lead to organizations or leaders changing. It's not bearing fruit in the real world. In 1996, there were 1,700 business books that were published in the United States, and they say more are published every year. And many of the books, as they began to look through these 1,700 books from 1996, they found that while the graphics might be different, the illustrations might be different, that year after year, the same basic content is given to leaders, to organizations without much change. In fact, in 1996, that same year as they were studying the books, they found out that $43 billion was spent on management consultants by organizations. $43 billion, bringing people in to assess the organization, to help them develop strategies, to improve, to grow. And yet when they followed up, they found out that very seldom is the advice ever listened to. How many times has an organization, or have we, went to a conference, maybe filled a notebook full of information, good principles, and then we go home, we put it on the shelf, and we never take it off again. We enjoyed it, we know we heard good things, but we don't put it into practice in our daily life. They said this is what's called as the knowing-doing gap. That many times in life there is a gap between what we know and how we live or practice or the things that we do. Now they're talking about in organizations, but of course in the church we know that this often takes place in our spiritual life, in our physical life, in our financial life, that many times we are educated well beyond our level of obedience. And that's part of our journey to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. But in the leadership realm, it becomes a challenge to think that we're not growing as a church or we're not growing in the business that we lead because while we are taking in more information, we're not putting it into practice. And so they began to look at what are some of the reasons that keep us from doing what we know to do. And I want to share just a couple of the barriers that are barriers that keep us from turning knowledge into action. And the first one I think really resonates, and it's this, it's talking. He said there's a tendency to treat about talking about something as equivalent to actually doing it. That mentally, emotionally, that when we talk about a subject, that we can convince ourselves that we've done something about it. That's scary for me because I think of how many times, whether I was in church and we talked about the Word of God, or sat down at a table with somebody over lunch, or maybe it was in a classroom and we talked about something that needs to be done, and we left the meeting, the monthly meeting, department head meeting, and we felt good because we had addressed things, we had talked about it, and yet that's as far as it goes. They found out that there is a fulfillment in talking about it even though we didn't do anything about it. Now, they wanted to emphasize that just because you talked about something, don't convince yourself or deceive yourself into thinking you've done something. Yes, we do need to talk about it, but until we actually change our actions or change our behaviors, we have not closed the loop. We have not done anything. And if we don't do anything, then our organizations or our personal lives can't grow, can't improve. And so talk becomes a substitute for action. They said second barrier they found is the past or memories, that sometimes memories are powerful, and that something that happened in the past, something we did in the past, makes us complacent in the present. We don't feel like we need to work as hard or do as much because we've done it before. And this can take place in all of our lives to where maybe at one time we really gave a lot of effort, we did a lot of hard work, and so we sort of feel like, hey, I can coast now. I don't need to continue to push, to grow, to improve. The third was fear and distrust. And I think this is important to many of us because they found out that sometimes we are afraid to take the risk of doing new things. That even when we know it needs to happen, that we're afraid of what will happen if we act upon it. Now, I know as leaders or as individuals that there are many times that we knew what we should do, what we needed to do, and yet we didn't do it because we didn't know what would happen. Think about that conversation with someone on your team. Maybe it needs to be a conversation of accountability, what I call carefrontation, not confrontation, but you care enough to speak to somebody. And yet you're afraid to have that conversation because you don't know how they're going to react, what they're going to say. And so what happens is we just sort of ignore it. And as a result, things don't change. The status quo remains intact. So they would say fear. Other times it's fear of failure. We're afraid to sort of take that risk because we're not guaranteed success. We're not guaranteed the outcomes. So when it summarized it, they found out that just this fear will keep us from taking things that we know and putting them into action. I thought about these things, and I thought in sharing with you today about leadership, it would be a tragedy for us to continue to build more and more knowledge without putting it into practice, without it making a difference in our lives, in our organizations, and the lives of the people that we lead. And so today I hope that you will make a commitment, not to just grow in your knowledge, but to take that and share that and apply it in your personal life and in the life of those that you lead, in the department, the organization, the ministry that you're involved in. There's guidelines for action. Let me share a few of those as we come to a close today. First of all, it is important that you are growing in your knowledge. You can't act upon something that you don't know. And so the knowing doing gap is not an excuse not to continue to grow and to learn and to study and to read books. No, it's actually just the opposite. It's critical that we are filling ourselves up. If we're not full, we're not going to have anything to be able to share or to give to anyone else. Who is it that said, I don't know can't remember if it's Peterson or McDonald, maybe it's McDonald, that we are to minister out of the overflow. That if we're not filling ourselves up, we can't minister to others. So we have to make sure we're full. And the knowing doing gap would say the same thing. Continue to grow, but make sure it doesn't stay there. That you're sharing that and that you're applying it, that you're taking the risk, knowing and teaching and then demonstrating for others to grow with you. Here's what we also understand is that action counts much more than just plans or concepts or good intentions. So take the risk. When you turn off the video today, or when you go from this brief vlog, here's what I want you to do. Think about the things that you already know you should do, but that you're not doing, and ask why. Things that you don't need to learn, but you know in your heart we should be doing, we should put in practice. You know what the answer is already. And think, why are you not doing them now? And let's make a plan to take at least one of those items and to take the risk and act upon it this very week. And let's see what happens. The worst thing that can happen is that it won't go as planned. And then we can know that we've already canceled out one solution and we can go to the next. But as long as we settle for the status quo and we do not put our knowledge into action, we can't grow, and the organizations, teams, departments that we lead can't grow. And so this is Brent Coltharp for Urshan College, Urshan Graduate School of Theology, and our monthly leadership vlog saying, let's take something we know this week and let's put it in the action. Let's do something about it. Let's not be educated well above our levels of obedience. God bless you. We'll see you next time.